Hello, welcome to this video on business objectives. So in this video, we're going to look at different objectives a business might have, in particular focusing on maximization objectives. We've got the three here, and another behavioral theory known as satisficing, having a satisficing objective. So what different objectives might a business have? You can probably think of lots of objectives a business might have. For example, it might just be to survive in the first instance. Quite commonly, it's to increase level of profit. If it's a social enterprise, maybe it has a social aim. There's lots of different objectives that we can see here that might make sense for a business to have. But we might argue that these are the most common: to maximize profits, to maximize sales or revenue, to increase market power, to survive. And then we might also think of broader categories of business, not-for-profit businesses, social enterprises, or public sector businesses. In this video, we're really going to look at these ones to start off with, the maximization objectives. So when we're talking about business objectives, we often talk about maximizers, those aiming to maximize something, and those who behave in a slightly different way, maybe a less conventionally economic way, and we call them satisficers. So they're just happy with their lot or a bit less. It's good enough. So maximizers behave in a traditional economic way and always may try and make the best possible choice from the available alternatives. And when we're talking about maximizing business objectives, we normally talk about three different objectives a business might have: to maximize profit, to make as much profit as possible, to maximize revenue, to make as much revenue as possible, to receive in as much money as possible, or sales maximization, to sell as many units as possible without making a loss, so as long as we don't lose money. But how many units can we sell? And these different objectives may lead to businesses targeting different levels of output. And we're going to now look at some of the economic theory behind how a business might decide or establish what those different levels of output might be, depending on the different objective. So we're going to illustrate this by looking at a business. And here we have a business and we have some financial information from this business. And then we're going to have a look at how the different objectives might change how much output, how many units they would wish to sell. Okay, let's start off on the left-hand column. Fairly straightforward. Here we have output. That's the number of units the business could sell. It's got 0, sell nothing, or they've got 7, they could sell 7. Then we have the next two columns, total revenue and average revenue. And we're just going to think for a second that average revenue is really another word for price here. And we'll explain that in a second. Okay, so let's imagine, let's start off. They start off by pricing their items at 50. If the price is at 50, they would sell 1. If they lower the price a little bit to 45, then they would sell 2. Now, selling 2 units at 45 each generates a total revenue of 90. And we can see the relationship here between these two. So if we sell 2, we'll receive 90, which means on average, we've got 45 for each unit. Another way of looking at this is if the price is 45, we will sell 2 and we'll generate 90. So you can see here, this is like a demand curve here. It's the relationship between price and quantity. As the price lowers, we can say we'd sell more, and so our revenue is correspondingly here. Okay, so we can see if the price is at 30, we'd sell 5 and we generate 150 of revenue. So that's our first 3 columns. Let's jump quickly to the 4th column here, and this is total cost. So again, this is just telling us how much it would cost for this business to make that number of units. So for example, we can see that it would cost 50 to make 1 unit. It would cost us 72 to make 2 units. It would cost us 87 to make 3 units, and so on. This next column, the 6th column, is the average cost. So here, if we make 2 units and it costs us 72, the average cost of producing a unit is 36. If we make 3 units and it costs us 87, the average cost is 29. Okay. Let's jump now to the last column, and this is profit. So this is revenue minus cost. So we can see if we don't sell anything, we get 0 in revenue. We might have some costs, even though we don't sell anything. So profit is minus 20. Let's jump. If we sell 2 units, if the output is 2, we will receive 90. It will cost us 72, and so we'll make a profit of 18. So the profit here is the revenue column minus the total cost column to give us the profit. Now, just to finish off, we're going to look at 2 more columns here, the marginal columns. We're going to start off by looking at marginal revenue, and we can see here down here that the marginal revenue is the change in total revenue from 1 additional unit sold. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail here. So if we look at marginal revenue first of all, we're saying this figure here, this column tells us how much extra revenue we get from 1 additional unit. So let's have a look. If we sell 1 more unit, if we go from 1 to 2, what happens to our revenue? Our revenue goes from 50 to 90. So how much extra revenue has this unit by selling 2 units? How much extra revenue have we generated? Well, we've generated 40. We've gone up from 50 to 90. So the marginal revenue of the second unit is 40. And that's because to sell the second unit, we had to lower the price to 45. But that meant both the first and second unit were sold for 45. So we received 90 in total. So how much extra revenue do we gain by selling a second unit? We gain 40 extra. So you might just take a little second just to make sure you're following this and working it out. Likewise, if we go from the 5th unit to the 6th unit, what happens to the revenue? Well, it stays the same here. And so the extra marginal revenue of the 6th unit hasn't really added any extra revenue. We're still getting 150 due to the relationship between demand and supply. Price and demand here. So lowering the price, we sell 1 more, but actually it hasn't made a difference in terms of how much money we receive. PD there is 1. Now let's look at the concept of marginal cost. Very similar in terms of concept. We're saying, what is the change in total cost from 1 more additional unit sold or 1 more additional unit made? So let's have a look. If we go here from the 3rd unit to the 4th unit in terms of cost. If we go from the 3rd unit to the 4th unit, our cost for 3 units was 87, and that increases to 116 if we make 4 units. So the marginal cost of the 4th unit is, by making the 4th unit, we increase our cost by 29 in total. If we go from the 4th unit to the 5th unit, our costs rise from 116 to 150. So by making 1 more unit, the cost of that extra unit has increased our total cost by 34. So adding 1 more additional unit increases our cost by 34. Okay. So we've explained this table, and we're going to use this table now when we talk about the different objectives that a business might have. So we're going to start off by looking at profit maximization, and we've got our table again in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see our table with all our data. It's the same table as we had beforehand. And what we've done here is plotted certain curves. So we've plotted the total revenue curve. So the total amount of money coming into the business is 90, 120, 140, 90, 120, 140, and so on. We can see that's the money coming in as we sell more units. We've also plotted here in yellow or orange the total cost. So 20, 50, 72, and so on. 50, 72, 87, and so on as we make more units. And so we subtract the costs from the revenue to get profit. And what we'll see here is where the gap is the biggest, that is where we're making the biggest amount of profit. And the grey line here shows us the profit. So 0 if we sell 1, 18 if we sell 2, and so on. And what we can see straight away is that the biggest amount of profit would come from selling 3 units. If we sell 3 units, we would maximize profit, we make a profit of 33. If we were to increase that to 4 units, we only make a profit of 24. So what we're going to try and do now is devise some sort of rule where if the business follows that rule, they can be sure that they're going to maximize profit. And we're going to develop this rule by looking now at the average and the marginal revenues and costs. So let's again take some time to go through this chart and what it shows us. Again, it's based on our table that we went through at the start. In blue, we have the average revenue, which effectively is like price. This is like our demand curve. So if we have a price of 50, we sell 1. If we have a price of 45, we sell 2. The price of 40, we'll sell 3, and so on. Okay, we can see that sloping down. In orange, we have the marginal revenue curve. So that was this one here, looking at how much extra revenue do we get from each additional unit. So if we sell 2 units from the second unit, from that additional second unit, our revenue will go up by 40. If we sell 3 units, the extra additional revenue from that third unit will be 30. If we sell 4 units, the extra additional revenue from that fourth unit will be 20. Again, we can check back down here on this table and remember how we derived these figures. We also have the average cost, and we can see here the average cost is falling as we make more, and then the average cost starts to rise as we make more. So that was the average cost of making those units. And finally, in yellow, we have the marginal cost. And again, we remember that's the additional cost from adding that extra unit. So if we add 1 more unit, we go to 2 units, that increases total cost by 22. If we add another unit, that increases total cost by 15. Okay. Now, what we can see here to derive our rule is that, if you remember correctly, we maximized profits at 3 units. Okay, we maximized profits at 3 units because here at 3 units the profit is 33. Now if we look at the relationship here between the extra revenue and the extra cost of that third unit, what do we notice? Why is the profit being maximized here and not say at 4 units? Well, that third unit added 30 to our revenue and only added 15 to our cost. So that third unit is having a very positive contribution to profit. If we add a third unit, we get more on revenue than we do added to our costs. If we go to the fourth unit, by adding a fourth unit, we're adding 29 of cost, but we're getting only 20 more in terms of revenue. So for the third unit, the extra revenue is greater than the cost. But for the fourth unit, the extra cost is greater than the revenue. So obviously we can't sell 3.5 units, but what we can see is that we should sell as many units up to the point here where the extra costs of those units start to go above the extra revenues. So the rule we can derive here is that the business will maximize profit to the point where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost at this point here. So we should try and sell however many units we can closest to that point, which in this example here is 3 units. Up until that point, the extra revenue is always greater than the extra cost from those additional units. Beyond that point, the extra cost is greater than the extra revenue, so it's not economically viable. We're not going to make a profit from those extra units. So we can generate this rule. Again, if we look down the bottom left-hand side, we can see this point here where the marginal revenue crosses over. Up until this point, the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. The marginal revenue for the second unit is greater than the marginal cost of the second unit. The marginal revenue, the extra revenue from adding a third unit, is greater than the extra cost. By the time we go to the fourth unit, then this is not the case anymore. The cost has become greater than the extra revenue. So we can say that profit maximization occurs when we sell up until the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This is our rule. Profit maximization occurs where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. We can see that again on the top right-hand diagram over here, When we look at where profit is maximized, the 33 of profit was maximized at 3 units sold. Okay, so 3 units sold because that third unit, the margin, the extra revenue from the third unit was greater than the cost of the third unit. By the time we get to the fourth unit, yes, we're still making a profit, but profits have not been maximized here. We're making less of a profit, 24 compared to 33. And that's because the marginal cost, the extra cost of that fourth unit, has started to go above the extra revenue we might get. Okay. So I appreciate this might be quite complex. You might want to watch this again and try and follow the logic through, but we've derived a rule here for maximizing profit, and that occurs where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. We will be coming back to this concept of marginal revenue, marginal cost, profit in more detail later on, so don't panic too much. So a little bit more on that in the bottom right hand corner. If we have a look down here, shareholders will be motivated by maximizing their profits for the company. In other words, if we maximize profits, shareholders will get the most dividends. So it's assumed that for most firms, they will want to maximize profit for the benefit of the owners. Obviously, that's not always the case. Not every firm is able to operate at a profit. They face different demand curves and different costs, and some will be faced with making a loss. And we'll look at that later on. We have two types of profit we might want to talk about: long run and short run. Long run profit maximization is something that Keynesian economists would believe that firms seek to maximize profits, not necessarily in the short run, but in the long run. And in order to do that, firms might work out what do we think it's going to cost us to make these items, add on a percentage to generate a level of profit by charging a price that's based on a cost plus pricing strategies. If we're talking about short run profit maximization, that's more of an idea that firms adjust their price and output in response to changes in the market, so they change price quite frequently. Although we would note that customers tend not to like rapid price adjustments. So this might suggest that a firm might continue to operate if it's making a loss, in the idea that in the longer term we might be able to respond to market conditions, change our prices, change our costs, and make a profit. So it might be worth making some brief notes here, but I wouldn't stress too much about the differences here. Let's move on to our next objective, and that is not profit maximization, but revenue maximization. And so we want to sell as many as we can without making, well, we want to generate as much revenue as we can. Okay, so how many units would we aim to sell so that we can generate as much money coming in as possible? So what we're concerned with here is the blue line in our diagram on the top right. So this is the revenue line. So straight up we can look here and say, well, at what output is revenue highest? And we can see it starts at 90, 120, 140, goes up and up. But then we can see here 150, and then it goes back down. So actually this seventh unit here is actually, for some reason, presumably because we have to charge such a low price to attract this seventh customer, that the revenue of selling 7 of those items at that price has actually gone down. So here we can see straight up that our revenue maximizing level of output is 6 units. Now let's turn our attention back to our marginal and average curves. Can we again use our curves here to develop a rule? Well, let's have a look. We're only concerned with revenue here, so we're looking at the blue line, which is the average revenue, so effectively the price that we're charging. And we can see as we lower price, we would sell more. And then we have the orange line, which is the marginal revenue. So this is telling us by selling that extra unit, how much more is added to revenue. And we can see here that when we go the top right, when we sell the third unit, the price to sell 3 units would be 40. But by selling a third unit, 3 lots of 40 is 120. The revenue would go up from when we sold 2 units at 45 by 30. So the marginal revenue of the third unit would be 30. And we can then deduce that actually revenue will keep rising in total as long as the marginal revenue is positive. So as long as for the third unit, the marginal revenue is 30, we can see that the revenue will continue to go up. The marginal revenue for the fourth unit is 20, which means revenue will go up by 20, 120 to 140. So we can say that as long as the marginal revenue is positive, we will keep generating highest possible revenue. And we can see that a point here, a key point here, marginal revenue is 0 for the sixth unit. So actually by selling the sixth unit, our revenues stay at 150. We don't gain any extra revenue. But we can see that if we go beyond it to the seventh unit, actually our revenues start to go down. We could see that before they went down from 150 to 140. Our marginal revenue here is minus 10, so quite negative. So what we can say is actually what number of units should we sell in order to maximize revenue? We should sell all those units up to the point where marginal revenue equals 0. So our rule here to generate the highest possible sales revenue is that firms should sell as many units up to the point and including where marginal revenue equals 0. Okay, let's move on to our next area or objective, which was sales maximization. And that's saying how many units, what's the maximum number of units we can sell without making a loss. Let's again go to our top right, and we can see here our first criteria is what's the maximum units we can sell. So we're going to go along 1, 2, 3, 4 before we make a loss. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, we make a profit of 0. Beyond that, we start to lose money. We start to make a loss. So we can see straight away that actually what we want to achieve is an output of 5 if we want to maximize sales. We can sell 5, that's the maximum we can sell before we start making a loss. Let's try and derive a rule now that tell us what businesses would need to do in order to achieve that. And we can see straight away that there's no coincidence here that before we make a loss, the total revenue equals the total cost. So if you go back down here to our table, what we want to do is look at the average and marginal revenues and costs to try and derive a rule. And what we can see at level 5 of output is that effectively we're saying this is the maximum as far along we can go along here before we start to lose money. And we'll start to lose money where the price we're charging is higher than the cost of making the items. So we will sell up until the point where the average revenue equals the average cost. Prior to this, we're making a profit because the average revenue is higher than the average cost. Beyond that, we're actually making a loss. So our rule for sales maximization is we can sell up until the point where average revenue equals average cost. Beyond this point, we're making a loss. We don't want to make a loss. So we're not using that as our objective as to how many units we're going to sell. We're saying how many units can we sell without making a loss? We should sell up until the point where average revenue equals average cost, that many units. Okay, so we've looked at maximizers in some detail there, profit, revenue, and sales maximizers. Another theory is that we might have, rather than maximizers within our business, we might have satisficers. And satisficers look at a more limited set of alternatives and choose the best between them. So many businesses adopt satisficing rules. They're not looking to maximize profits or maximize revenue, but they're using general rules of thumb. So they might say, okay, we might not be maximizing profits. We just add 10% onto our cost to get our price, but we're going to be kind of happy with that level of profit. So satisficers may be the managers of a business who are more concerned with increasing revenue and market share rather than pure profit maximization. Some more thoughts on profit satisficing. So some managers are said to be motivated by factors such as high salaries and the number of people under their control, rather than just profits. And this idea generates from the concept that managers in large firms, because of the principal agent issue, the divorce of ownership and control, may pursue policies that give them personally the most satisfaction, but don't necessarily maximize profits for the shareholders. So what managers might do in this situation is they might adopt a process of profit satisficing. So they might generate enough profit to satisfy the demands of shareholders, and then once they've reached those demands, they're not going to pursue any greater profits, not going to maximize profits. They're then going to pursue their own rewards, or what makes them happy, gives them satisfaction within the business. So this kind of approach would be an example of profit satisficing. So in this video, we've looked at different objectives a business might have. We've looked at maximization objectives, profit, revenue, and sales, and how we might use the concept of marginal revenue, marginal cost, average revenue, average cost to develop rules that we can use to suggest the number of units a business would sell in order to achieve that objective. We've also looked at another behavioral theory to do with objectives and management within the business, and that's the concept of profit satisficing, generating enough profit to satisfy owners before other objectives can be pursued, or just settling for not necessarily a maximum level of profit, something that they're just happy with as a business. That's it. Thanks very much for listening to the video.